There is one storyline that changed comics and superheroes more than any other, and this year it is celebrating its 30th anniversary. It is time to discuss the death of Superman because your Geek History lesson is now in session. Hello and welcome to Geek History Lesson. I'm Jason. My cape is going to fly on a stick, Inman.
I'm Ashley Victoria Robinson. Welcome to your Mind University because you have stumbled onto the podcast where we take one character, construct, or incredibly important event in art culture and teach you everything you need to know about it in about an hour. And this week, I guess we're doing something kind of a little different.
Nah, I mean, sorta. Yes,
yeah.
no?
Well, we're talking about a whole storyline, but it's not a book club.
Yeah, we're talking about the death of Superman.
Spoilers.
I mean, it's in the title.
I know.
But that is fair. There is a spoiler warning. Superman dies.
For a 30-year-old comic story.
Yeah, he died 30 years ago. He got better.
He's fine.
He got better.
It got better.
Okay.
Much better.
There is the death of
So someone in England is so mad right now.
I think I was pulling that from a movie. I can't remember which one, but there you go. The death of Superman storyline is, of course, one of DC Comics' most iconic tales. It basically forever changed the way that death operates. I would say not only in superhero comic books, but in television and in movies. It was published between 1992 and 1993. And basically, if you've never read the storyline, this is going to be interesting. We're going to go through a lot of the publication history about why they decided to kill off their basically most famousest of superheroes in 1992. And it's a really fascinating storyline. So the Death of Superman storyline we're going to talk about today, of course, started with Superman's fatal battle with Doomsday, which is called the Doomsday storyline. The superhero community's response to Superman's death, which was called Funeral for a Friend.
So good, the best part.
The emergence of 4 characters claiming to be Superman, which was Reign of the Superman. And then eventually it led to the return of Superman. And this is another thing why I wanted to celebrate this, because this storyline is so unique. And it's so unique in so many different ways because it was told across 4 different monthly Superman titles.
Yeah, do you hate crossovers? You can thank this event.
Yes.
Actually, this event, in my opinion, exemplifies crossovers done really well.
Yes, and it featured the talents of some amazing people like former GHL guest Dan Jurgens,
Icon,
Louise Simonson,
Icon,
Roger Stern,
Icon,
Jerry Ordway,
Icon,
Carl Kessel,
Icon,
Tom Grummett,
Icon,
John Bogdanove,
Icon.
I call him John Bog. Jackson Geist, Brett Breeding, and more.
Yeah, everyone who worked on this is like incredibly important in comics history now.
I'm gonna say it. They're all legends.
Yeah,
they are all legends at the top of their game. They were at the top of their game in 1992. They're at the top of their game still.
Yeah.
This is gonna be a fun episode. Again, full of discussions and info. And don't forget, we also are gonna have an interesting discussion. We have comic creator Charlie Stickney. He's gonna be joining us to give us some comic fan, and also he was a comic book publisher at one time, so he's gonna be giving us that perspective on the storyline later on. So let's get to this 10-cent origin of the death of Superman.
Yes.
What's the 10-cent origin, Ashley?
Thank you. That's the first part of the podcast where we teach you.
We're doing like 450. I didn't realize I had to set you up. I'm sorry.
You do every time. Where Professor Jason is going to tell you all of the basics, who's it's and what's galore, in case you go to a dope DC Comics themed cocktail party and some nice person is like, hey, what was the deal with the death of Superman?
So the Death of Superman is a DC Comics crossover story event featured in DC Comics Superman related publications. It was edited by Mike Carlin. It was written by Dan Jurgens, Roger Stern, Louise Simonson, Jerry Ordway, and Carl Kessel. It began in December of 1992, and it lasted until October of 1993. Now, this is, of course, not just the death. It includes those other storylines. Yes. It was published in specifically these titles: Superman, Action Comics, The Adventures of Superman, Superman the Man of Steel, Justice League of America, and Green Lantern. Now, let's get to the meet cute.
That is the second part of the podcast where we are going to tell you the first time we meted the story and how cute it was.
Ashley, where did you first read or hear of the death of Superman?
I mean, who knows, honestly, because I was a baby when this happened. So for me, this has always been something that I've known has happened in the pop culture sphere.
Mm-hmm. When did you first read it, I guess, then, is the question.
after Geek History Lesson started.
Oh, boy.
Maybe 2015 or 2016. Kind of in that, I've never read this. I know this is important. I should check it out.
Yeah.
And it's awesome. I'd seen about 100 million copies of it before then, because when you work in comic book retail, you get a lot of people coming in with the polybag thinking that issue's worth a lot of money.
Which specific issue is that?
That's the one where he dies.
The number? What number is that?
I have no idea.
Oh, boy. Okay. Superman number 75.
Oh,
I figured
okay.
I would we can't assume that our listeners know all the events.
Look,
of this.
when people brought it to me, it was always in the black poly bag, so I literally had no idea. I apologize.
Yeah. There was three. I believe there were three different of the specific issue that Superman died, which is Superman 75.
Yeah.
I believe there were three specific editions. There was the normal, just comic book newsstand version where it's his cape fluttering in the wind.
It's the one that's on all the trades now.
Very famous, iconic image. There is the image. There's the black polybag one.
There's a white polybag as well.
It was called the platinum polybag.
It was white.
and when you open that one up, it had a platinum silver cover. Now the black polybag one apparently came with the Superman armband, so you could wear the armband like all the superheroes going to Superman's funeral. It was
so popular they printed them in such high demand, which is why they're not worth anything anymore. You'd be better off spending your money on the collections.
Yes.
Where did you first meet and cute? I mean, I'm assuming you read this live.
I did not read this live.
Oh, wow.
I read this after. I read this. I've told the story on GHL before. This trade paperback of Death of Superman I bought in a gas station in Erie, Kansas. Had no idea. I'd heard about the storyline. I'd heard about it on the news. This made the news. Death of Superman made the news.
Regular people news, not comic book news.
But I didn't read the storyline until I think maybe the next year after the storyline. But I had the trade of Death of Superman, and it ends with, of course, where he dies. Spoilers, climax. And it was really my introduction into the DC universe. It made me be like, oh, wow, there's Batman, there's Green Lantern, there's all these people here. I still have that very first trade. I mean, this is the storyline that is responsible, I would say, for me reading any kind of comics in a large scale facility. Not a place. Capacity. Thank you so much.
And you have that version signed by Dan Jurgens, which we told on I don't know if it was that episode or the extra, but we did tell that story.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to dive deep into the death of Superman, and we're going to have a great conversation. And if you like this conversation and you need more, this week's Geek History Lesson extra episode on Patreon is going to be comic deaths that did and did not work, plus comic talk with creator Charlie Stickney, our guest.
Woo!
So head on over to patreon.com/Jawiin. That's Jawiin, and join to get more podcasts like that. And our Justice League podcast, which is Jason and Jeremy John about Justice League, where we review every episode of Justice League, the animated series. You're also going to get 4 bonus episodes of GHL Extra, Marvel Club, 2 episodes of Justice Pod a month. There's a lot of extra bonus episodes over there, and ad-free episodes of Geek History Lesson.
Woo!
So head on over there. Thank you to all our super friends that support us each and every month at patreon.com/Jawiin.
We love you.
All right, so let's get behind the scenes of the death of Superman. So Superman had been rebooted in 1986. Back to square one. Clark Kent and his supporting cast was brought to be in a 1980s worldview because of a major event called Crisis on Infinite Earths. Usually we wait a while until we get to this. Ashley, would you like to explain Crisis on Infinite Earths to somebody in case this is their very first episode?
Well, I'd really encourage you to go back and listen to our 6-part series Crisis Club, which you can find in protracted versions in this feed. Actually, Crisis on Infinite Earths, which if you haven't read, like Death of Superman, is required reading.
Yeah, but not until you have some comic books under your belt. Don't make this your first comic book.
I mean, if you've been a comic book fan and you've been sleeping on Crisis, please read Crisis. There were so many multiverses, and DC was like, oh, there's so many multiverses. So then the Anti-Monitor ate them, and then he pooped out one universe, and everybody got a reboot except Batman, who got a real soft reboot.
Yes, and some other characters too, but I'm not sorry. But Superman got a full reboot. Pretty hard
reboot. Into, I'm gonna say it, probably prior to the birth of John Kent, my favorite version of Superman and Co.
I'm going to say that this is probably my favorite era of Superman.
Yeah.
So now Lois and Clark were restored to newspaper reporters for the Daily Planet because Clark had been a television reporter before this. Lex Luthor was transformed from a mad scientist with delusions of world conquest into a sort of very famous, very overweight businessman with delusions of gold toilets and world conquest. Later creators would add the science angle back to Lex Luthor, making him more believable. But this had a very dramatic change because, this led into a brand new Superman, basically under the control of writer-artist John Byrne, who's a very famous X-Men and Fantastic Four artist.
And Wonder Woman.
Now, the time we hit the early 90s, Superman started not selling that well. It basically kind of started losing its sales after John Byrne departed, because he'd successfully redefined Superman. And in an effort to halt the slide of sales, editorial decided to up the romance of Lois and Clark by making them engaged.
This was a good choice.
Yep. Lois Lane and Clark Kent became engaged in 1991 in Superman issue 50, but it would take another couple of months before Clark could be truly honest with Lois and reveal his secret identity to her. So he proposed as Clark Kent. And then it took him a couple of issues to be like, oh, by the way, I'm Superman. And that issue where that happens is the very famous cover where it's Lois looking right at the camera and she's holding Clark Kent's glasses, and in the glasses is the reflection of the Superman S shield. It's a very iconic cover. With this change, comics status quo had truly changed forever. Marriage was on the books, and the comic had planned for the wedding to happen in 1993. Now, this happened in the past, Ashley, but I want to ask you, at the point that we are talking about, current day,
yes,
do you think it's possible to do a non-married Superman and Lois anymore? Do you think that Superman and Lois being married is just such in the zeitgeist and such in pop culture that, think about it. We have a TV show called Superman and Lois where a married Superman and Lois are married in the comic books.
They got married in the DCEU.
They got married in the DCEU. No, they didn't.
Well, he proposed to her.
Oh, that's true. That's true.
He's back as Superman, so they might get married.
There was a period very recently, actually, where Superman was single and stuff like that. But do you think we are just in this point of Dick Grayson always being Nightwing now? And we're about to cross the period where Dick Grayson will have been Nightwing just as long as he's been Robin.
Yeah.
It'll happen next year, actually. Yep. Do you think we're at the point of no return where hey, it's Superman and Lois are married? That's just the game.
I hope so. I feel the very same way about Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson. I think it's way more interesting to explore that side of their personas and their personalities because we've spent so much time doing the other thing. And because comic books is the perpetual second act, I think it appeals to me, the idea that these characters can kind of move on. It's what I find satisfying about Dick Grayson as a character, is that he's fully moved on from the Robin identity. If they ever did another hard reboot where Dick went back to being Robin and Lois didn't know who Superman was, I think it would feel very strange. I hadn't considered, as you pointed out, the implications in television and film, but I think if it's not cemented in pop culture and in sort of the cultural zeitgeist, it's certainly on its way. And obviously and
also with the emergence of John Kent,
I was going to say the addition of John Kent to the larger canon is certainly going to cement. I mean, you could have them get divorced, but
that'd be weird.
I hope not.
I don't know.
They're going to keep Batman unmarried. Excuse me. So I hope,
I don't know if I could stand a Superman divorce story.
Superman, look, being divorced doesn't make you a bad person.
No, I know.
I just want to clear that up. This is not a value judgment on being divorced, but Superman is the big blue Boy Scout. Yeah. He is the broad strokes, meat and potatoes Americana ideal. And that is, tied up in certain cultural and religious expectations. And one of them is that you stay married. So I don't see Superman getting divorced, but I mean, in the realm of all things possible, it could happen. I hope he stays married. I love married family man Superman. I really do.
Well, in 1989, Time Warner turned their attention to DC Comics and began promoting Batman and Superman aggressively. Batman got a movie series and an animated series. Superman got a pair of television shows. From 1988 to 1992, he had the Superboy television show, which was the adventures of a teenage Clark Kent. And then came 1993's Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman.
The New Adventures of Old Christine.
Starring Terry Hatcher and Dean Cain, which aired on Sundays on ABC. I specifically remember watching that on Sundays. This focused on the adventures of adult Clark Kent and his rival/love interest Lois Lane, and Superman was actually pushed to the back burner as a character, also because they couldn't afford the special effects. This was done to save on budget and to make when Superman showed up more impressive. It actually was a huge success of a television show.
I can't believe they let Terry Hatcher play Superman.
She did a great job.
Yeah, she's amazing. Nothing else needs to be said about that cast.
Because of the success of the television show, this actually made Time Warner look more positively on Superman.
And that show is beloved. For people who watched it at the time, there is a nostalgia and a love for that series.
I mean, I watched that show, or I watched most of it live.
Yeah.
It does not hold up, but I remember it fondly just for the reason that it was the only superhero live action show at the time. It was literally all we had.
Yeah.
So it was good for what it was. I'm glad. It was a fun Sunday night. I'll just say that.
Look, and there's a direct line between that show with all of its, problems that we would put on it now, and Smallville and Superman and Lois Lane.
So Superman's comic line during this drastically expanded. The long-running self-titled Superman was now retitled Adventures of Superman. There was Action Comics, there was the Man of Steel, and they had a newly launched Superman, which would cover the life and times of Clark Kent. This made for basically one Superman comic being released a week.
That's the life and times of Clark Kent. That's a great title.
Yeah. Now, the plot lines would intersect between issues of the run, and DC would eventually invent what is called the cover triangle for Superman. This would be a little triangle error. This is colloquially known, I mispronounced
colloquially.
That. Thank you, Ashley. As the triangle era. And you'll see it as you'll find some Superman comics that have a triangle on the cover, and I'll say like 1993 1.
Little yellow triangle.
1994 2.
Yeah, it actually makes organizing your comics really confusing.
It does. So this, I'm going to just say the triangle era is, it's my favorite era of Superman comics. I'm just saying that right now. So Time Warner at this time was all about brand synergy, because that's what these corporations want to do. So with a brand new show about Lois and Clark being romantically flirty and not married, the higher-ups figured people would get confused when they weren't married in the show, but they were married in the comics. So eventually, Lois and Clark, The Adventures of Superman, had Superman propose to Lois Lane. Now, Superman was now engaged to Lois Lane in the show and the comics. But the comics and the TV show were now competing on who would get to walk Lois and Clark down the aisle first.
I kind of love that.
Yeah. So Superman group editor Mike Carlin and DC president Jeanette Kahn decided that the highly anticipated wedding should take place in the show first, not the comics.
With the barest of Google searches, you can find the full wedding clip on the YouTubes.
Fun fact, they get married twice in the show.
Do they really?
Because the first time, spoilers, Clark marries a faux Lois.
Or a Foes.
A Foes, yes. It is not actually the real Lois Lane. She's been kidnapped and take off somewhere. And so they didn't do the real wedding, I think, in the next season.
Is she a Luthor?
I don't remember, Ashley. I don't know. If you want to go watch Lois and Clark, The Adventures of Superman, it's all on HBO Max. Have fun. We're not sponsored by HBO Max.
LOL.
So the postponed wedding in the comics between Clark Kent and Lois Lane had to be replaced with something else. And the writing team at the time was kind of stumped, because the wedding was supposed to take up, and all the honeymoon and all that stuff was supposed to take up a year's worth of stories, and now they had to throw it all out in the trash. So during the annual Superman Summit, where the writers would all meet to come up with story ideas, apparently this is a legendary story that every single year when they would get stuck, Jerry Ordway would just yell out, "We should kill Superman."
It's also literally the opposite of a wedding in a lot of ways.
But apparently he'd been saying this for the last 3 to 4 years.
I'm aware of the story, apocryphal or not.
Yes, as a joke. And because of this year, and because they were all like, oh, we just had to throw out an entire year of planning, Jerry Ordway threw out the joke, let's just kill him. And Louise Simonson actually said, maybe that's not a bad idea. And so, according to interviews, Louise Simonson, writing Superman the Man of Steel, liked the idea. She had worked on the death-prone X-Men franchise with Chris Claremont, and she thought it would be a great idea to tell a story about how much the deceased character meant to all the other characters in the supporting cast. Editorial approved it. Jerry Ordway has later said in interviews that he was actually speechless when the plans began, when they were actually planning how to kill this guy. But the original idea was that Superman would die in Superman 75 and come back to life in Adventures of Superman number 500, keeping milestone issues on both ends. And it all started with a certain character named Doomsday. Now, Ashley, how would you describe the villain to Doomsday? Excuse me. How would you describe villains to Doomsday? If you're talking to Doomsday and you're having dinner with Doomsday,
okay.
How would you describe a villain to Doomsday?
So you know what you are?
Rawr!
That's a villain.
Rawr! That's my Doomsday impression.
Yeah.
It sounds like Tim Allen from Home Improvement.
Fairly also a villain.
Yeah, also a villain. But how would you describe Doomsday to somebody who's never read this storyline?
Are you asking me to describe him as a character or visually?
Yeah, I don't care, either or. The question is open to interpretation.
He looks like a big gray monster with bony spikes that, I guess, according to his rage or the whim of the artist in the story, can elongate as necessary. He comes from space.
Mm-hmm.
And
he comes from Krypton.
He comes from Krypton.
He's Kryptonian.
He's Kryptonian. And he's most famous for killing Superman.
What do you think about the choice to have a brand new villain whose first appearance is the death of Superman, kill Superman over like classic Superman villains like Brainiac or Lex Luthor?
I have kind of two schools of thought on this. This happens in every single comic book, like ever. They always introduce a new character. Sometimes they pretend to be their friend, like if it's Godspeed in The Flash, and then they wind up being like, this is a very tried and true trope. On the one hand, it does feel a little convenient to suddenly introduce a villain who is suddenly capable of murdering Superman, which is something that he dodged for like 50 years up to this point. And on the other hand, if it was one of his rogues gallery, then how come they didn't kill him all along?
It would also
it immediately elevates one of those characters above all the rest of the staples.
Well, I actually don't think it elevates. I think it demotes, because then that character, if you ever want to tell a future story with that character, will always be connected to this storyline.
But also, they killed Superman, so they're better than everybody else.
But the play on most of these characters is, especially like Lex Luthor, somebody like Lex Luthor, is that you sometimes get to play him as Superman's friend.
I understand.
And if you have him kill Superman, that is gone.
100%. Or like Brainiac is like fascinated by Superman.
It'd be like Magneto stabbing Professor X in the chest. Like the fun of Magneto and Professor X is that they get to have
they're besties. They're opposite sides of the same coin.
Yeah, they get to have the tete-a-tete, as some would say.
Oui, c'est ça. Yeah, so I understand. I ultimately think it's a good choice. But I can understand people who might feel dissatisfied by it at the same time.
Well, so Doomsday kind of has two origins. Mike Harlan came up with a name for the original villain because he wrote on the whiteboard Doomsday for Superman, and they just thought that was a really great name. The design for the villain came from sketches that Dan Jurgens had for like sort of a monstrous character that he just always wanted to do, but just had never used anywhere.
Yeah.
So when they decided what villain should kill Superman, they thought that the existing foes relied too much on technology and intellect, and they did not want to kill Superman by using kryptonite. That was like off the table.
They were like, use that as a crutch.
They were like, we will not use any part of kryptonite to kill Superman. So in the month prior to the death of Superman, each of Superman's stories began with a massive green gloved fist hitting a metal wall, just saying Doomsday was coming.
Yeah.
And as the month wore on, the glove began to collapse, revealing gray skin and bony protrusions like a demented and monstrous Wolverine. And suddenly the wall broke open and Doomsday was here.
Dun, dun, dun.
Now, Superman's long, bloody fight against Doomsday would take place across 4 issues, leading towards the climactic finale in Superman number 75. In the 75th issue, Dan Jurgens wanted the final issue to be told through splash pages and emphasizing the suspense and the action. And if you read this storyline, it's only 4 issues, you will notice something special. And I've talked about this on this podcast before. Adventures of Superman number 497 was the first part of the storyline. It would use 4 panels per page on every single page.
Oh, yeah.
Action Comics 684 was part 2, and it was reduced to 3 panels per page. Man of Steel 19 had 2 panels per page, leading to the death of Superman, Superman 75 having 1 panel. So it is a countdown to his death.
Can I
let me finish and tell you whose idea this was real quick.
Okay, sure.
Brett Breeding was the one who came up with this idea and thought process.
Okay, so now I know for sure which year I read this. It was 2015 because this was when Jason and I were at the height of creating and pitching comics and doing a lot of stuff for anthologies.
Mm-hmm.
And you, Jason, were a big part of like helping me understand what you can do different in a comics medium.
Mm-hmm.
And you pointed this out to me as an example of how you can use format to tell a story and like how format affects the pace of reading. And that's why I initially read The Death of Superman.
Ah, okay. So Superman's superpowered battle basically happened in the heart of Metropolis. Superman was going to die fighting Doomsday. He dies on the steps of the Daily Planet.
Mm-hmm.
And the heartbreaking final page of Superman 75 was a triple page spread featuring Lois Lane engulfed in tears as Superman laid dead in the wreckage. Ashley,
yes.
let's talk about this classic image.
Yeah.
Everybody, if you have read any comic books, I think, has seen this classic Dan Jurgens image.
Yep.
Of the cape in the background and Lois crying.
In the collected editions, if it's not the cape on the stick, it's this image on the cover. Always. Yeah.
Almost all the time. It's funny, at this point I was going to ask you about, people bringing their issues of 75 up to the comic shop. It's literally my notes. Ask Ashley about Superman 75.
We used to tell people
at the counter.
This is no drag. It's a great issue. It's a great story. But again, there's just such a proliferate. It's the same thing for any 90s Spider-Man issues, worthless. We used to tell people because people would die like Superman dies in this issue. It's so important. And we'd be like, it is not worth the paper it's printed on.
He's died like 2 more times since then.
And then if it was in the poly bag, people would say, but it's in the bag. It's never been opened. And so because I was not a kind and generous person, I would be like, oh, yeah, those are blank pages in there. They didn't even print the comic.
Fun fact, I have never, ever owned the polybag version of this issue.
I can go walk and get you one right now.
For $1. Yes, I know. I understand.
They mean 25 cents.
Yeah. There are new versions of it. They just published like a 30th anniversary special.
Yeah. And no, they're amazing.
And one of them has like an armband in it.
Yeah.
I've thought about going to get it.
Yeah.
I want that armband.
Honestly, enough retailers, someone will just throw 12 copies of that issue at you to get them out of their storage space.
But what do you think about this image, Ashley? What do you think about the choice to have Superman die on the steps of the Daily Planet? Okay, so Superman's dead. Thoughts, insights about this specific moment, Superman's actual death, that he dies. Is the city safe?
Yeah.
Like you turn the page and he goes, and he dies.
Yeah, he's like,
you can hear
death rattle.
Hear the whimper.
Yeah.
And Lois goes from no, like to like you can just hear her wails.
Yeah, it's very dramatic in the way that like comic books are melodrama. That is in soap opera, like that is the tone at all accounts. I think it is such a clear distillation of everything that Superman is and everything that he stands for. Like he dies at work.
He kind of does.
In the arms of the love of his life.
Well, he dies at work saving the city from Doomsday.
But he also dies on the feet of the Daily Planet.
I know. But Superman is sort of his work job, too.
Yeah, he works 2 jobs. He dies at both of them. How American is that?
He doesn't live in a mansion like Bruce Wayne.
No.
He's working 2 jobs, and he's killed for it.
Yeah, and he's murdered and dies in the arms of the love of his life.
And he dies at work.
Yeah, doing both of his jobs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is such a clear distillation of who Superman is and what they were trying to say about this character and his impact.
Uh-huh.
And it's a really stunning image, like just as, not even a piece of comic book art, but just as a piece of art. It is really arresting. And like you said earlier, you can hear Lois Lane scream. Like if you can have like an ASMR experience of a comic book, that's quite something.
Now, DC did not intend for Superman's death to be permanent, but they kept the secret because, they know how to sell a story. And because
there was no internet for people to spoil everything.
And they all signed non-disclosure agreements preventing them from revealing when the character would return. Mike Carlin expected fans to know the death would be temporary, but he did say in an interview in 2018 that he could not believe how many newspaper reporters and TV reporters interviewed him like the death was permanent. However, the teams delayed all Superman comics.
Never change comic book journalism.
The teams delayed all Superman comic books for 3 months after his death to create the illusion that he had been killed because of the solicitation cycle would have spoiled his resurrection in Adventure Comics number 500. Now, Ashley, let's explain. You worked in a comic book store. Explain the solicitation cycle in case people aren't that familiar with how comic books are like sort of sold to comic book shops.
Yeah, so because we're beholden to Diamond, which is something
which is not true anymore.
It's becoming increasingly less true. You have to order on the Diamond schedule, which means that
Who is Diamond, just in case somebody doesn't know?
Diamond is a distributor.
Yeah.
So they're the ones who, when they receive from the printers or the publishers all the issues, they're the ones who break them up and send them to your local comic book store.
Mm-hmm.
They're awful. They suck. They're the worst. Moving away from Diamond is the best thing the comic book industry's done in years. And so ordering on their cycle means that they send out a catalog called previews, physical and digital now. And you have to order 5 months in advance. So you as a retailer or sometimes a manager in a retail space have to guess what your customers are going to want 5 months from now. But as a result, depending on the quality of the solicitation, which is the little blurb describing what happens, sometimes stuff gets really spoiled. So this is actually, in terms of like a macrocosmic view of how the comic book publishing industry works, this is a genius move.
Mm-hmm.
Really smart.
So this storyline tore through news media. I can remember seeing a news report on television about the death of Superman. I can remember, this will show you how old I am.
25.
I can remember reading a newspaper article about the death of Superman.
Yeah, I believe USA Today or
they all covered it.
Like put them right on the front page. Yeah.
So this issue sold like gangbusters.
Yeah.
First edition copies of Superman 75 sold expensively on the secondary market. And the runaway success of the entire endeavor would convince DC editorial bosses that they should do the same exact thing to all their other superheroes.
Murder them.
So
that's such a DC move.
in a bunch of moves, Batman's back was soon broken in the next couple of years. Green Lantern Hal Jordan lost his city and turned into a villain. There were plans in place to kill off Wonder Woman, Flash, and Green Arrow, although only Green Arrow happened. And it has been said in later interviews that the death of Superman is the entire reason why the Spider-Man clone saga happens over at Marvel, where Spider-Man is replaced by his clone. Now, Ashley, I want to ask you, do you think any of these other replacement storylines or maim or hurt or kill our hero storylines are successful?
Ooh, the Batman one is. Batman's broken back.
Nightfall.
Yeah. The whole Bane of it all.
I think the Green Lantern one is successful.
The Green Lantern one is pretty successful. I mean, I hate Hal Jordan, so.
Although a lot of people were very angry about how they turned Hal Jordan evil.
Yeah, a lot of people didn't know that Hal's always been a villain. I think the Ollie one is successful as well. Obviously, it's a much more, if you're looking at the sort of, again, the macrocosmic view of like DC publishing, it's a much smaller, but like that's a great storyline. And some of the characters who come or step up out of these storylines, including your very favorite Asbat,
Azrael Batman, Connor Hawke, the second Green Lantern.
I love Connor
Green Arrow, excuse me.
Yeah. Are some of my favorite in their franchises. So I mean, I would say when you lay it out like that, it does feel very silly, and again, it feels like that's such a DC move to do. However, ultimately, I would say it's successful. These are all popular, well-regarded storylines.
It's funny because I would have never put the Clone Saga together with being tied to Death of Superman, but when you think about it, you're like, oh, that is 100% the reason they did the Clone Saga.
They literally eat their cake and have it too, because they have just another Peter Parker.
Yeah. Now, the media attention, which nobody on the DC Warner Bros. Side expected, caused Mike Carlin to delay Superman's resurrection beyond the Adventures of Superman number 500, because the teams knew that bringing Superman back that soon would be illogical. And they held an emergency Superman summit at a hotel in Tarrytown, New York, where they decided to plot and rewrite their story. They decided to introduce a new version of Superman before bringing back the original, with each writer coming back with different ideas. Louis Simonson suggested that each writer create their own Superman, which not only solved the problem of what the new character would be like, but finally allowed each of these Superman teams to have independence after years of each of their storylines funneling into the next one. Now, Ashley.
Yes.
I would like you to name the 4 replacement Superman.
There's always one I forget.
Of the reign of Superman. Superboy in the best costume. Superboy the clone. Yes, that's correct.
So cute. We love him. Such a piece of work.
Now, of course, all these characters, for readers and listeners, they were all called Superman when they debuted.
Yeah.
Superboy actually was in the Adventures of Superman.
Steel.
Yes, Steel, John Henry Irons. He's the man in the Iron Man-like suit that looks like Superman.
He's got a big hammer. He's amazing. We love him.
He was Louise Simonson's character. He was in Superman, the Man of Steel.
Yeah, if anyone has never read that series as well, that's an
amazing.
Excellent series. He's also gone on to be like an incredibly important character in the Supergirl TV show, and
he's in Superman
and Lois as well. Yeah, really, really awesome. There's the Eradicator.
The Eradicator, yes.
That's the one I usually forget. Booster Gold Superman.
No.
It's just because of the glasses.
He has, giant yellow sunglasses. He was actually a John Byrne character. He was a villain. He is a Kryptonian computer program. He looks like Clark Kent. He looks like Superman, basically. He was introduced in Action Comics. He was Roger Stern's character. Roger Stern said that he wanted to write Superman as if he were like the Pope or like a Messiah-like character.
Yeah, that's fairly accurate. And then the Cyborg Superman.
And the Cyborg Superman is Dan Jurgens' Superman, who appeared in Superman.
He looks like what if Terminator and Superman had an evil baby.
Exactly. Apparently, he was like an idea that Dan Jurgens had for like a future Superman, but then decided to convert him into this.
Good idea.
So there you go. Who's your favorite one?
Superboy.
It is Superboy?
No, honestly, it's probably Steel.
Mine's Steel.
But I do think this is my preferred version of Superboy.
Oh, okay.
That is this version.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. What do you think, do you think the reign of Superman was successful?
Yes, because these characters are all still around.
Most of them are. I mean, Cyborg Superman's not around. Well, but yes.
They're all around in that they show up regularly or semi-regularly in the comics, the TV shows, the cartoons.
Yeah.
Like, they made a whole movie of the reign of the Superman, and it's good.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I can't speak to the sales. Having blessedly never worked at Diamond.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think through the long lens of history and art history, definitely successful, for sure. Jason has 85 of these action figures.
We're going to find out which ones I have right after this. Welcome back to Action Figure Spotlight, the action figure podcast, where all we do is talk about action figures. So ball jointed action figures. Do we like them? Yes or no, Ashley?
No, I like them better as little figurines because then they don't fall. Their knees don't buckle all the time. It's so irritating.
It's mainly their ankles. So let's talk about which of the reigns of the Supermans that I have. So it's a fun fact. I have two. I actually have action figures of all the reign of the Superman except for Cyborg Superman. I do not have Cyborg Superman. I really would like one. Mezco made one that's very expensive. It's like $100, and I'm not going to spend $100 on an action figure. Anyways,
if you want to spend $100 on an action figure for Jason, you can reach out for our P.O. box address.
I have Steel, and a very amazing Steel,
Yes.
and it wasn't from the DC Universe Classics line. It was from this weird Superman line they had before that. And that Steel was actually gifted to me by Jeremy Skinner of the Jason and Jeremy John About Justice League. But I also have a Superboy action figure that I got very recently that is from DC Universe Classics.
Yeah.
And I believe, it was gifted to me by a Geek History Lesson listener. And I forgot who sent it to me. But I know you're listening. And I want to say thank you. I remember. Because I posted online that it was like, or I said on one of these podcasts that I really wanted that figure, and I forgot who sent it to me.
Tweet us, let us know at GHL Podcast, and we'll give you a proper shout out.
There you go. Yeah. So we'll give it up there. So, but those are my two favorite figures. So 2 of these guys turned out to be villains. 2 of these were good guys. And then a black-suited Superman with long hair showed up, who was revealed to be the real Superman. He had no powers, and he liked to carry guns, and this is the first version of the black suit. Now, Ashley, when the black-suited Superman showed up, he walked up to Lois. Mm-hmm. And how do you think he proved to Lois that he was the real Superman? Lois said, "Prove that you are the real Superman." What do you think he said to her to prove that he was the real Superman?
He ripped off his mustache, and that's how she knew.
He's like, "I'm back from Mission Impossible. Here I am."
He kissed her right on the mouth, and he didn't have to say anything because his tonsils did all the talking.
No, he said, "What about To Kill a Mockingbird?" Now, why is this significant?
I don't know.
To Kill a Mockingbird is Clark Kent's favorite movie.
Oh, there you go.
So that's how she knew this was the real Superman. So when Superman came back in this long version, Dan Jurgens did not simply want to use Superman's classic design when he was revived. So that's why they gave him the long hair, and the black suit was like an idea they had for another storyline.
Do you think that the black suit is in any way derivative or inspired by Spider-Man's black suit?
I mean, sure.
Maybe intentionally or subconsciously?
Maybe. I don't know. So
just a thought.
Ashley, what do you think is the real in-story reason for how Superman came back to life? It's pretty complicated and a little gonzo.
Oh, boy.
But this is the actual in-universe comic science of how he survived.
So Jor-El, who lives inside the crystal, vibrated all of his remaining Kryptonian essences into the crystals, and they reached down into the roots of the earth and shot Kryptonian lightning into Superman's body, where he was buried in like a Kansas farm or whatever.
And like Frankenstein.
And he rose up out of the ground.
Superman
and then
smash,
punched his way out of the coffin. And that's how he got revived.
Jor-El has nothing to do with this, but good guess.
Thank you.
In the aftermath of the death of Superman, it was revealed that the Eradicator, the Kryptonian computer program, was activated. He stole Superman's body from the crypt, and he placed him inside a Kryptonian device in the Fortress of Solitude called the Regeneration Matrix.
A Bacta tank.
Yep. It's a Deus Ex Machina machine. The Regeneration Matrix allowed the Eradicator to siphon off Superman's powers for himself in order to pose as Superman. That's when he did this. And it slowly revived him from death, or at least left him in a special Kryptonian death-like state. Because apparently with Kryptonians, there's a difference between mostly dead and all dead. Upon Superman's resurrection, the Eradicator made sure to note, probably because of the input of DC editorial,
they just called him up on their little phone matrix and were like, "Look here, Eradicator."
Well,
we're in DC editorial.
You got to say this line. The Eradicator basically told Superman, "It's safe to say that something like this will never be possible again."
That's not true at all.
Yeah, I know.
They killed him like 2 more times.
Even though I think Superman has, died a couple more times. So they all teamed up, all these reigns of the Supermans, to defeat the cyborg Superman, who at this point in the storyline had revealed himself as a full villain because he blew up Coast City, Green Lantern's home. And then the real Superman eventually beat him up and got his red and blue costume again in basically a page flip. And the team also in this design, they decided to deepen the red and the blue of Superman's costume to signify that things had changed.
I also like that in English, the word reign has 3 or 4 meanings.
Yeah.
So you said the reigns of the Supermen, and I just imagine like Clark Kent like pulling a chariot of the four.
Yeah,
replacement Superman.
Take me to Coast City, my men. Anyways, happy up. Hip, hip. Yeah. So fun fact, this issue of Superman that he returned actually came with a poster of the long-haired Superman flying away from this, and I had that poster on my wall for several years. So I'm just gonna throw about that. Now let's talk about some of the sales stuff. The bump in sales that DC had taken from the death had of course slumped during the return. And to make matters worse, the whole reason they delayed the marriage in the comic was because of the Lois and Clark television show. In the television show, they would not marry until October 1996, 3 years later, in an episode titled "Swear to God, This Time We're Not Kidding."
Season 4, episode 3.
Yep. The comics would finally be allowed to marry that year as well, with the delay of the wedding simply having the excuse is that life is weird when you're Superman.
This is funny because it's giving me real flashbacks to the Batman non-wedding in more recent comic books history. Like there's so much drama around the idea that these characters might want to put a ring on it.
Yeah. Well, and then also the wedding eventually allowed, this is where Superman eventually cut off his hair. So we got short-haired Superman came back for the wedding. So generally overall, DC writers and DC editorial have denied that the death of Superman was a publicity stunt. But Ashley, I want to ask you, is the death of Superman a publicity stunt?
Yes.
Or over the years, has it morphed into something else?
No, it's 100% a publicity stunt. It's just a really freaking good one that happened, like, luckily, because there were, as we stated at the top of this, so many geniuses working on this, happened to actually be worth a damn. It is 100%. This is like making Jane Foster Thor is a publicity stunt. It just happened to be a really good one that actually worked.
I think it's a perfect example of that necessity is the mother of invention.
I agree. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
Because we were talking about the weddings and superhero weddings and stuff. What's your favorite superhero wedding?
There aren't many, to be honest with you. I mean, Jean Grey and Cyclops' wedding is pretty good.
Yeah.
The Superman Lois wedding issue is pretty good.
Yeah.
It's a little goofy. So I've always liked that one. The cover is fantastic. It's a John Byrne cover where they're flying in the sky and they're like both smiling. I had that issue.
That's a great cover. I think my favorite is still the Ollie and Dinah, like the wedding album storyline.
Oh, I'm not a fan of that one.
I really like that. I find it very charming.
I don't like that one because that wedding does the thing that Lois and Clark did, where like you find out that the Oliver that was in that wedding was not Oliver. And so it's like, oh, where is he? And then you're like, well, so are they married or are they not married?
Oh, I mean, but like, I think the wedding itself and like them having to like beat up bad guys at their wedding is like very charming.
Yeah. I think it's so Ashley, what do you think is the legacy of Death of Superman 30 years later?
Oh, I mean, it changed everything. My mom knows about this storyline.
Yeah, my mom does too.
Which is wild because she knows like nothing about comic books. Mm-hmm. I don't even think she knows that there's more than one Robin. The legacy of this is it's very similar actually to Nightwing's legacy. It's that these characters can change and they can bloom and grow. Mm-hmm. This opened the door for, I mean, you said there's not a lot of weddings. There's not.
Not off the top of my head. There's not really.
But there are some.
There's a lot of deaths.
There are a lot
of this.
There are a lot of stalwart couples like Batman and Selena, even if they're not married, right? Like their relationship also begins to evolve from this point to where it is now, where we're all basically like, yeah, but they're married though. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a lot of deaths, but it also, this changes the precedence on death and death's permanence. And, you know, you made this joke ages and ages ago and like shit comic book nerds say, where you were like, oh, well, they'll never bring Bucky back. Oh, well, they'll never bring Uncle Ben back. Like they brought everybody back. Mm-hmm. Whether it's an alternate universe, whether it's a blip, like we have seen Gwen Stacy and Peter Parker talk about their grief for each other together. Like mm-hmm. this changed everything. Mm-hmm. In a lot of ways, there's a reason that it's revered. There's a reason there's a 30th anniversary special. There's a reason there's new stories being told in that. It's because that's how much it matters, and that's how much people still. That's why we're talking about this today and not the Clone Saga.
Yeah.
Although we might talk about the Clone Saga eventually.
That might be a fun one to do.
Yeah. I have never read the Clone Saga. Spoiler alert.
I have read it.
I think I've read the Death of Superman twice.
I have read it from start to finish. I did it once because I think there was a sale on Comixology or something like that, so I bought them all.
Yeah.
And I decided to dive in.
I remember that.
And I read it, and it is so bad. It is mind-numbingly bad.
Yeah.
It is like watching a Roger Corman movie that thinks it's an Oscar movie.
Yeah,
and I like Roger Corman movies.
But there's also a difference between being bad but still being charming.
Yes. Like Sam Raimi.
Yeah. Honestly, yeah.
Yeah. You're exactly correct. I think there is a before Death of Superman in comic books, and there is an after.
It's exactly like Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Yeah.
100%.
And in some ways, it might be the biggest and also the most important Superman storyline of all time. And
there's certainly if there's certainly an argument. Have we done best Superman stories?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Anyways, so we're going to talk about this a little bit more. We have a special guest comic book expert. We have the writer of White Ash, Galarian, The Game, The Adept, and the former comics publisher of Scout Comics, overall comics fan, Charlie Stickney here to talk about Death of Superman. Charlie Stickney, welcome to Geek History Lesson.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on.
Well, it's always a pleasure to have a lover of the comic book medium like yourself onto the podcast. So, we are deep into Death of Superman and celebrating its 30th anniversary. And I want to ask you, in the 1990s, the early 1990s, were you a big fan of Superman, or when did you finally come around to the big red and blue?
Well, so, I think with a lot of us, our fandom goes in waves for different things. And for me, Superman was one of the first superheroes that I kind of fell for, in that, my parents gave me this hardcover called Superman from the 30s to the 70s. And I don't know if you've ever seen that. And I think they did another one.
I think they've reprinted that recently, actually.
Yeah. And
I think they recently reprinted it. It's great. Yeah.
It's got the first appearance of Batman and Superman meeting each other, and they're like on a cruise ship, and it's just like, it's really great because like you get the sense of what the stories were like in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, which then got all wacky. That was like when Wacky Superman came out for the first time, and then the 70s they started telling these more hard hitting stories, and you could tell a little bit of like that the nuclear threat had sort of pervaded some of the stuff in terms of some of the stories that were being told. But yeah, for me, that was one of the first introductions I had to superheroes. So I really like Superman. And then, I think my love for Superman kind of waned. And I wasn't really into comics. And then when I came back to comics, and this was, I'm already like waxing and waning. And here I'm now going to say, now I was 11. I was like 11, and I fell in love with comics again. And at that point, it was all Marvel. And so I was a big Spider-Man fan and an X-Men fan. But eventually, like, there's that I think I like to call comics creep, where the longer you're in comics, the more things you start incorporating from different companies. And so, then it was, okay, I'm going to read this Batman book. And I think it was Death in the Family that brought me back to Batman. I started, okay, I'll read this Batman series. And then you pull in a Robin miniseries. And so you're in the universe. So I had like a great childhood love of Superman, but I wasn't actively reading that many Superman comics, aside from the occasional events like when he was going to propose to Lois Lane in Action Comics. I think I started reading the book, so I would be all caught up when that event happened. So
that's very interesting, because the engagement is very much integral to the reason why the Death of Superman storyline, and they did that as like a way to pull in fans. So that worked on you.
Oh, it 100% worked on me, because you have to remember at the time this was pre-internet, right? And so where were people getting their comic book news from? And I think there were two sources that people who weren't directly working at companies were getting news from. And one was the comic shop news, which you can still see that's given out in some stores. And that was kind of a leave behind that was stuffed in your bag when you got your books. And that was like 4 pages worth of content. And it would just basically be advertising things that were upcoming. But the other thing that, because I when I was in college, and this is when Death of Superman came out, I was a freshman in college. I at that time, I was pretty sure I was going to work in the comic book industry. And I was wrong for the next 15 years after that. But eventually I proved myself right and came back to it.
Yes.
But when I was like a freshman in college, I was like, I'm going to be in comics, so I need to get the trade. And if you're in Hollywood, there's things like the Hollywood Reporter and Variety that people have read forever, and that's what again before internet, where they went to get their news. And in comics, there was this one publication called the Comic Buyer's Guide, which was a weekly comic book newspaper that was around 52 pages long, that was filled with articles and interviews with creators and with publishers about their upcoming events. So I had been tracking the Death of Superman event that was upcoming for a good 2 months. And I was very excited about that, about it hitting these stores. And yeah, it was 100% like, this is going to be an event. This is, it got me excited. And like when Superman was going to propose, I think I bought the 3 issues up to the proposal and then like the 2 issues afterwards. And then I tapered off and I was like, I got 100 other comics I'm buying. I don't know if I'm still interested to see where the Superman story goes. But with the Death of Superman, I definitely wanted to be part of that and see what was going to happen.
What do you remember about the buildup to Death of Superman? Do you have any specific memories? Because I myself, and I said this earlier in the podcast, that I remember there being a newspaper articles about this, and I remember there being local television news articles about the death of Superman. The traditional media really believed that he was going to be dead. And I think the general public believed that as well, which is the reason why the issues sold through gangbusters. So I wanted to know, as somebody who, you were dabbling a toe in the comic book industry, as you said, you were hoping to work in the comic book industry when this event happened. What do you remember of this buildup? And, was it the buzz of, the era?
Yeah, it was definitely one of the buzzes of the era. I think I'm trying to remember in the chronology whether, so Spider-Man 1 had come out a couple of years earlier, which was
the Todd McFarlane issue, right?
Right. Yeah. And then Spawn, I think, had also come out before this. So like there had been a couple of big things. And I think some of DC's thunder was going away. And Superman, I think he's a character that's hard to write well. And there's too many iterations of him that people see as boring or not interesting. It's the same problem that Captain America has had in some ways, that the characters don't seem inherently flawed enough, and so you have to be a really good writer to be able to handle that. But for me, as someone getting into this, I never thought he was going to die forever, right? I mean, I thought it was going to be a big event book that I wanted to get, because I knew that the collector's market was going to go crazy for it. And so it was something that I was tracking, but I was also, I'm a fan of stories. So I wanted to see where it was going to go. So I had bought like the 1 or 2 issues again, leading up to that. And I knew it was coming. I figured, at some point he was going to come back because, at that time there were 2 deaths that mattered. It was Captain Marvel and Bucky, and everyone else came back. And you never thought those 2 were going to come back, but
I used to always say it was Uncle Ben. It was Uncle Ben and Bucky.
Okay, yeah,
I never slipped Captain Marvel in there. That's very funny.
Yeah, it was like different eras, right, of collecting.
Yeah.
And
you did buy the issue.
Well.
Okay. Again, here we go. The tea comes out.
This was the problem. Was I think we as consumers of geek culture, of comic books today, are so much more informed about how things work. Like New Comic Book Day is a thing that we all know. We know that that's Wednesday. That's when the comics are put on the shelves, right? And as much as I styled myself as an aficionado, of someone who understood the business of comics, I didn't know that like New Comic Book Day was Wednesday. So I knew the week it was coming out, and I think I had, I had the local shop because, again, I was in college. And when you're in college, you're in a little bit of a vacuum. And so I wasn't seeing the mainstream. I wasn't seeing any media. Like the only reason I knew about it was because my comic buyer's guide, and I had been planning for months. But I knew I needed to get there early on the day or it was going to sell out. So I walked into the store, as it opened that morning, and I'm looking around and I'm like, I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing it. And, and I went, this was Iron Vic's Comics in Poughkeepsie, New York. And I went to Iron Vic and I was like, Vic, where's the Death of Superman? He's like, we're sold out. I'm like, what do you mean you're sold out? And he's like, it came out yesterday. And
you missed out, kid.
Yeah, it was totally that. And like, I was crushed. Right.
Oh,
because
man, I imagine.
It wasn't just, I missed out on this hot thing. It was that sense that you knew what was going on ahead of other people because you were informed, you were in the know, that I was this educated comic book collector. And all of that came crashing down because I didn't know the day that the book was released on. And so like there was this disappointment in myself that somehow I had screwed this thing up in a way that, the lesson of, say, Spider-Man #1 in the bags and all of that should have taught me was to be really prepared for this because I had been there for that. But even that, like I had pre-ordered, I think it was like the various different versions of the Spider-Man bag, and a couple of them never showed up because there was just
so when you say this, because even myself, I'm not familiar with this. So you're talking about when Todd McFarlane, when he rebooted and relaunched Spider-Man in the early 90s, Spider-Man #1, did they do like a collector's version of it in a clear bag or something like that? What are you referring to?
There were 2 collector versions in a bag. There was it was all. I'm trying to think of whether they had a version that wasn't in a bag. I think they had these this is the horrible thing. It's like, right, they had those bad poly bags that they would put over these books, which were not, archival. So what do you do? Do you remove it and make it non-mint, or do you leave it in this crappy bag to keep, for your collection? But yes,
well,
Spider-Man.
I wanted to bring that up because Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. So like I had lived through that kind of craziness, and there really was a craziness for both. Like there was a black edition, and then there was the regular red and green edition of that first issue.
Well, and I wanted to bring that up because Death of Superman, the same way, also had multi polybagged versions. There was the regular version that just had the cape, torn apart on the stick. They had the polybagged Red Shield version, and then they had the platinum polybagged version as well, which when you open that one up, it was a silver cover, and I'm not certain, but I think both the polybagged versions came with a little armband that you could have like a little Superman shield, so you could act like you went to Superman's funeral as well. And then and I didn't know Spider-Man did that as well, but I would remark that I think Death of Superman and these multi-poly bags really kicked off the insane nature of the speculator and variant, cover market of the 90s. So besides the collecting of it all, I want to, you eventually got an issue or you got a trade and you read it later.
Yes, I got the second print of it after.
Yeah. So, oh man, the second print, of course. What parts of the story do you think really work? And what parts of the story do you think have not aged so well?
Well, I think the part that works the best was there was this mystery of it wasn't like the death as much as the resurrection that I found interesting. And I don't know if we want to get into the resurrection.
Oh, we can totally. To me, I consider Death of Superman, Funeral for a Friend, Reign of Superman, and then The Return. Like to me, they're all really one story.
Right.
Yeah. So please talk about all of it.
Because I think the event, the death was. To me, the death wasn't as memorable as what came afterward. And I think if you go back,
I agree with that.
That was what they were thinking about. Like, what's the interesting story here is the reaction of the world to what happens when the most powerful superhero dies, right? And, they tracked back from that idea to create the death. So the death was just this big battle. And a
lot of punching.
Yeah, it's a lot of punching. It's a lot of battling. And that's the kind of thing that there's just not a lot of story there. And I think there's the visceral reaction of seeing Superman die that has an impact. But aside from that, like the rest of it isn't really as exciting. To me, what I think works best is, it's the post, it's the fallout from it, but it's also the mystery that they started seeding, right? With the return of the 4 different Supermen. And because each of them originally you thought maybe had a chance to be Superman coming back, that mystery was really interesting, and it also made you buy all 4 series.
Which of the 4 of the reign of the Supermen were your favorite? Which of those 4? Everybody has a favorite, and I think it tells a lot about you.
I think part of it is I was collecting it all out of obligation because I wanted to see where it went. I think of those, I liked the Superboy story the best.
Mm-hmm.
Just because it felt a little bit fresher. And I think if I remember correctly, because I resisted going back to read the issues because I still have them all. And I read, so just, I read from a couple of issues before all the way up all 4 of those different series until he came back. And I remember at the end of that, there was some big fallout with Green Lantern, right? And
yes, Cyborg Superman destroys Coast City, which goes on to turn Hal Jordan into the villain Parallax, which leads to the creation of Kyle Rayner. Right.
So like that, all of that. And then I think I checked out after that because I didn't want to read that many titles. And I was trying to pare it down from like the 60 I was collecting because I was in college. And I think when you're in college, you start becoming more picky. When I was in high school, I could devote all my disposable income to comics and buy as many as possible. But in college, I want to be able to eat because I'm now also paying for those things. And at that point, I was like the DC I transitioned to shortly thereafter was Sandman. And, I was looking at that. I was looking at Dark Horse started having their line with Hellboy and with Sin City. And so I was getting edgier. Or at least that's what I thought.
Do you think
go ahead.
Do you think it's possible in the modern comic book market, or even in the far future, do you think it's even possible that any comic book publisher could repeat this success of the death of Superman in some way? Because like they did this as a sales stunt. Now part of that was, massaged by they had to connect to Lois and Clark, The Adventures of Superman, which was also doing a wedding. So they did a death instead of a wedding. But do you think, like, could Marvel or could DC or even Image or Boom pull this off in the future? Like an event that captures so many people outside of comic books?
I don't think so, for a couple of reasons. First of all, geek culture has shifted in a way that it's more inclusive now. And so what was happening in the comic industry was secular, and it was this mysterious world, right? And when people started hearing that the death of Superman was happening, that became a national news story because no one was plugged in to what Superman was doing, right? Like for a lot of adults, I think it was just like, oh, it was that newspaper thing from the 30s or the 40s, or I watched these cartoons, or even there was that Christopher Reeve movie 20 years earlier that I loved. And so it was nostalgia and they wanted to see, and they sort of tapped in. Whereas now, like the DC universe is just like comics are everywhere. So I don't think you get that same buildup from, look at the big deaths that have happened in the Marvel movies, right? People leak those, and there are millions of people who they're out
before you even see the movie. Yeah.
Right. Like I'm going to give a spoiler for Avengers Endgame. So, if any of your listeners have not seen that.
It's a movie from 2019. I think you're fine.
Okay.
But yes, but I appreciate the spoiler warning.
When Tony Stark dies, right?
What? Man, thanks. I haven't even seen it yet.
But you know what I mean? It's like there was no, Iron Man at that point had become the biggest comic book character, arguably, in pop culture. Right? And was there a huge outcry was there all this interest. And there's not the same interest, as much as I love all these movies, they're not pushing people back to comic books. So,
no, they're not.
And I think mainstream media right now wouldn't care what comics are doing because, the movies are happening. And if the movies can't generate that kind of bump, like the death of Iron Man in the movies, like if stories aren't being written by that, if that's not driving people in to hit the comic book shop, I don't think like in the comics, if Iron Man died, anyone would care.
That's fair. And he's already died like 2 or 3 times, I think, even in the last 20 years.
Well, there you go.
What do you think, if you were to think about it, what would you say is the legacy of the Death of Superman event 30 years later?
Well, I mean, I think the biggest thing that sadly was happening in the early 90s was the need to do these event series, right? And I think the Death of Superman pushed the comic book market into a place where it felt like you had to do 2 or 3 of these, or at least one every year for any of your major lines. And, like Superman started doing this. Batman was obviously doing it with the Batman families. Spider-Man was doing it with the Spider-Man titles. X-Men was starting to do it, the Avengers. And so I think that kind of changed the kind of storytelling that was being done, both in a good and a bad way, because they saw the power of an event to draw in new readers. They saw the way to tell a story across multiple titles as a way to cross-pollinate and bring the sales up on all of those different titles. But I think people got fatigue. And I'm not going to say that it began pushing the comic book industry down a dark place, but the more of these deaths also you have, I mean, between like, once Superman could die and come back, why are you going to believe any character?
Oh yeah,
really
the first
dead, right?
The first superhero of all time. Like, yeah, you can't beat him. You can't beat him no matter how popular, like you said, like a character like Iron Man is now. You just can't do it.
Right, but also like I think it's once you tell a reader that that if you're dead, that doesn't mean you're really dead. Why do we care about any death after that? Right, and I think comics readers, like the hardcore ones for the longest time, have always been like, oh, Wolverine's dead. Sure, he's dead, right? Like, you're not going to kill off your biggest character. Oh, Batman's back is broken. He's never going to get better. And, that's the end of Batman. No, because that's how DC, that's how Marvel, they're making their money. They're not going to kill off their moneymakers. And I think, it's the fool me once kind of attitude. And I think that also did that. So I think, so those are 2 bad things, I guess, in terms of the legacy of Superman, in terms of like really pushing event series and making it so no one ever believed in the death of a character anymore. Just trying to think if there's any good legacy that I would take out of it. Maybe it brought more attention to the comic industry. Hopefully it brought in some new readers that were young at the time that got them interested in comics. Because I think that's the hardest thing that's facing the comic industry right now, is bringing in new readers, especially with characters that have been around for, at this point, Superman was in the 1940s, so we're pushing 80 years now, 1939.
This is I think next year is going to be his 85th anniversary.
Oh, there you go.
So it's funny. I make that same argument that Death of Superman, I think that is his biggest legacy, is that I think it might be one of the last events or stories of any kind to bring outsiders in, to like a huge swath of outsiders, because in the many interviews with Dan Jurgens that I did over my course of working at DC Comics, the thing that he would always tell me was, he would say, I would always get Death of Superman or Superman 75, that issue that he drew, and they would hand it to him to get him signed, and they would say, this was my first comic book.
Yeah.
And he was like, it would be hundreds of people. I think you're very right on that. There are, I think we don't have many events like that anymore. I think comics have niched even more.
I would say the closest thing in terms of an event to bring people in would be something like when you have a celebrity like Keanu Reeves doing Berserker, right? And he's able to, I mean, like, not that there was, I don't even know what the story is there with Berserker, but I know that a lot of people who are Keanu fans came to comics because of that. And hopefully they're going to get hooked and go forward. But yeah, it's really hard to bring in new readers right now who aren't people who are fans of comics.
Well, speaking of new readers, we have lots of people listening to this podcast that are fans of comics, and you have a kick-ass comic out now called The Game. Can you please tell our listeners about it?
Sure. Well, the quick pitch I like to use is imagine if Sam from Quantum Leap, the original series, jumped into the body of the Highlander and had no idea why this group of individuals was after him. The slightly longer pitch is it's about a man named Eli Tanner who turns 30 and all of a sudden starts seeing this scoreboard that's tracking everything that he does. Like, no one else can see this scoreboard for him, but it's tracking everything he does in life, from, you know, whether he has coffee in the morning to whether he helps someone cross the street. And what seems like this cruel cosmic joke that's just judging every action that he does turns out to be that people have mistaken him for player number 3 in a game that's going on for thousands of years, and he needs to quickly find out what's going on before things go pear-shaped. So that's I love stories that people all of a sudden find themselves in situations, and then they just kind of have to quickly think on their feet to get themselves out of it. And in doing so, they start uncovering this bigger and bigger world that they never realized that they were a part of, but of course they were all along.
And you just had a very successful Kickstarter campaign that for The Game, but can listeners still pre-order the book and still pick up a copy?
Yeah, if you go to our Kickstarter page for The Game, and I can give you the link for that, there will be a pre-order link to The Game and to everything else I do through my White Ash Comics imprint, including White Ash, Galarian, How I Slept My Way Through College, and other tales from freshman year, and The Adept.
And listeners, we will have a link to that in the episode notes. Go check out all of those comics. They are excellent. Charlie, thank you so much for talking about the death of Superman with us on Geek History Lesson. I can't wait to talk about the death of The Game or the death of White Ash in 30 years' time. I'm really looking forward to having you back on for that one.
Oh, thanks so much. I mean, if we can, I hope it's an event that brings in at least 10% of the people.
Well, only if you give armbands out or do a platinum edition, I think.
Happy to go that far.
And that was a great conversation with Charlie. Awesome. Let's move into the recommended reading, Ashley.
That is where, if you go to geekhistorylesson.com/recommended reading, you can pick up anything here that you liked if you want to know more about the death of Superman. Jason.
It's very simple here.
What do we got?
Everybody, it's very simple. These
I don't know.
books.
I don't know.
What was that?
I was like, I don't know. How can it be that simple? How can this episode be the title?
I didn't know if you were hyperventilating on the podcast. I didn't know what was happening.
No, only intentionally.
It's very simple, everyone. These books have never gone out of print in 30 years. Yep. There are new versions. Basically, there are 3 trades. Ashley, in the document that I usually share with you, recommended reading, I didn't even put them down. These are so easily searchable.
Yeah.
There's a trade called The Death of Superman. There's a trade called Funeral for a Friend. There's a trade called Reign of the Superman, Return of Superman. Just get all 3.
There you go.
It's the whole storyline. It's very easy. Actually, a couple years ago, they reprinted them all in like a trade dress. So if you put them side by side,
yeah, it's cool.
The spines make the bloody S of the death of Superman. So it's very simple. So go read it. That's it. And,
easy peasy.
And then if you, I guess you want a bonus, you can go read the Clone Saga, but I don't recommend it. Don't go buy the Clone Saga. So, but go check out those over at geekhistorylesson.com/recommended reading.
If you want to read the Clone Saga, get it from your library.
There you go. That's a great. Ask your local librarian to help you find the Clone Saga. Even your local librarian will be like, well, are you serious? What are you doing here, kid? They might slap you. Just throw it out there.
If you get slapped by your librarian, please let us know. That would be so funny.
I would admire the librarian.
Just like a nice 65-year-old lady with like glasses, chain, and a shawl around her shoulders, slapping kids running reading
She's
comics.
like, I'm not even going to explain to you why that's dumb. I'm just going to slap you.
I'm just imagining Imelda Staunton smacking people.
Ashley, let's get to the honor roll. What's that?
The honor roll is where if you go over to Apple Podcasts or iTunes or whatever we're calling it right now, and you write us a 5-star review, we will read whatever whatever you say. And if you're a nice international person, please do the same thing, but then take a screenshot and email it to geekhistorylesson@gmail.com because we can't see your international Apple.
Who's joining the honor roll this week, Ashley?
2 really nice folks, including Trapjaw26, who says, "Great podcast! I found this podcast very recently, and it immediately became one of my favorite podcasts. So might I suggest a lesson on the Umbrella Academy comics? I've read them over and over, and I'm always learning new stuff from the story. I think it would make a great lesson. Bye!" So thank you, Trapjaw26.
It's a good username.
And also joining them is Rocket Riswell, who says, "Love the show. I love the show. It's great to learn about someone you haven't read before, but want to learn some background for a new series, and great to refresh you on your favorites. Love the list episodes too. Wish the recommended reading page on the site was searchable or at least had page jumps." It has page jumps at the bottom. "As a newer listener, it's hard to get all the way back to the older episodes recommended reading. Look, if you're a website designer, you can email us geekhistorylesson@gmail.com. Welcome.
What's the name of this gentleman?
Rocket Riswell,
Or could be
lady, or nice non-binary friend.
Rocket Riswell?
Yeah.
If you use Google search, that's how you can hop through the recommended
Yeah, go Geek History Lesson, recommended reading, comma, whatever the title is. And our tags are very good, and that works.
I know that because that's how I do it.
Yeah.
And it takes you right to the episode you want.
There you go.
So there you go. Thanks for those comments, the both of you.
So what is going on in the Teacher's Lounge today, Jason?
Nothing, because Superman died. It's a sad day.
That's really funny.
It's a sad day. There's nobody the school's out today.
Oh, okay.
Because Superman died. Hey, have you heard the news?
I'm also pretty sure
Superman died today.
that Dan Jurgens is a professor in the Teacher's Lounge somewhere. So.
Dan Jurgens has been on this podcast, so he is a professor.
So go talk to him. Dan's also really nice, so go talk to him on Twitter.
But hey, have you heard the news? Superman died today.
I don't know what song you're parodying.
It's from Walk Hard.
Okay,
yep.
I certainly don't know.
Yeah. But no, the Teacher's Lounge is not open today. So
where is Professor Jeremy and Catherine Hahn?
At Superman's funeral.
What are we doing here?
What?
What are we doing here? Why are we not at the funeral?
We always work, Ashley. That's the truth.
That's true.
We always work.
That's not even that's
not even a joke.
Not even a joke.
But thank you, everybody. If you want to come into the Teacher's Lounge when it's open, don't forget to follow us and download this podcast on Spotify and Apple, everywhere there are podcast apps. If you like this episode, please tell your friends. Ashley, where can they follow the show on social media?
You can follow us at geekhistorylesson.com. If you put a /blog at the end, we do all kinds of amazing posts every Thursday, including geeky travel blogs from our adventures all over the world. You can also find us at facebook.com/geekhistorylesson, on Twitter at GHL Podcasts, and on Instagram at Geek History Lesson. We also have a TikTok that we're thinking about doing something with, but TBD.
Yes, and that's at Geek History Lesson.
Yes.
You can find Ashley on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Ashley V. Robinson. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Jawiin, Jawiin, and at TikTok at Jason Inman Writer. And now it's time for Stick Around. Because you stuck through all the plugs, we have a little bit of bonus for you. Ashley, you are... hold on a second. Hold on a second. I got something for you.
Oh, no.
Here we go.
God damn it. Hello?
Hello, I'm Louis Simonson.
Oh, hi.
Hi. I don't know why I'm slightly English, but I am.
That's okay. You're distinguished and well-educated. I understand.
Thank you so much. By the way, big fan of Geek History Lesson.
I mean, I wish that were true because we've been trying to get you on the podcast for
I know, and I've been avoiding your calls, but I've seen the emails. I know you've emailed me several times, tried to pull me on this podcast.
Because we love you, but yes.
I want to ask you a question here because, I am a talented writer.
Yes, incredibly.
Yes. If we didn't use Doomsday to kill Superman, who should we have used?
A big meteor-sized chunk of kryptonite.
I'm going to hang up now so you can talk to this. I just don't think that idea works. Okay. Ta-ta.
Bye.
So, Ashley, that's the question.
I think Louis Simonson liked my pitch.
You want to kill Superman with a Grand Canyon-sized asteroid.
I just thought it was funny because it was antithetical to everything that they said they wanted.
Yeah, but who? Okay, well, it doesn't even have to be a villain. How do you kill Superman? If you're not using Doomsday, you're in 1992. How do you kill Superman? Or what villain would you have kill Superman?
My pitch in the room would be that it's not actually Lois Lane, but it's like somebody impersonating or puppeteering or like use his greatest love against him,
stabbing you in the heart.
Because that's his, like, you taught me this. That's his greatest strength and weakness is his heart. So like that would be my pitch in the room.
I wouldn't, if I was in that room, I would have knocked that down because I'd be like,
I don't think I would have committed to it because I love Lois, but
I know.
I would have tried to come up with like a sort of not a monster beating him to death.
Yeah, because I'd be like, man, that might ruin Lois.
I know,
for
she's
years.
Like the greatest female character in the DCU.
Yeah. Wow.
But I don't know. I would have tried something. I think I would have gone a little more like someone manipulating something. But I really like Brainiac. I know when we did our best Superman villains, I ranked Brainiac really high. So that might have been where I would have started, would have been like something with Brainiac. I just think he's so cool.
Interesting.
What's your initial impulse?
I mean, that's kind of where my impulse goes is Brainiac.
I just don't see giving it to Luthor because you're right. No. Then it destroys those moments of camaraderie that they do have, which are like one of my favorites is like when Clark goes to interview Lex in prison in
All-Star Superman.
That was like the Grant Morrison Superman. And you're right. You could never have that back.
I think that, and it's funny you bring up All-Star Superman because I was going to bring this up. I actually think that All-Star Superman is like Death of Superman done on an Oscar movie level because that storyline is about Superman dying. It's 12 issues of Superman dying.
Yeah, but he's not killed. Like, I think they wanted the brutality of him being killed, which is very 90s as well, and 90s comics especially.
And I say this as somebody who loves Death of Superman. I think it's really well done.
Yeah, you can love it and still like have a different pitch on it.
Superman dying by flying into our sun, the source of all his powers, and having to restart the sun is almost the perfect death for Superman.
Yeah, but also, like, to paraphrase Lois Lane, is he dead or is he living there?
No, he's
watching
dead.
Over all of us.
He's 100% dead. It's symbolic. The idea of, in that storyline of Superman going into the sun is like Hercules going to Olympus.
It's so funny because when I think of that, like, I imagine, in like Soviet posters, which they like, where it's
what they were aping.
Where it's the laborer moving. Like, I just imagine Superman in there making the sun work.
Yeah. No, that is
like Apollo.
No, he's dead. He is 100% dead.
That's not the read that I take on it.
Yeah, no, he is dead.
Interesting.
He's there, and and it's funny, and I know like a lot of fans will be like, but that Superman does return in DC 1 million. One, okay, yeah. But two...
There's a little robot Robin in DC 1 million. He's so cool.
Robin the Toy Wonder. That's right. I love him. He should make an action figure of him. They never will.
They should make an action figure of him.
They should.
And also the little Robin robot from the Just League of China.
How did we get on Robin robots here?
You brought up DC 1 million.
DC 1 million is great. It is one of
wild.
It's awesome.
It would make a great movie, like an animated movie.
It would make a great animated movie. Anyways, that Superman, that's where he got the idea because in that storyline, Superman has been living in the sun for like 8,000 years and he comes out of the sun and he's basically an energy being.
Yeah.
So he comes out of that storyline. If they're connected, they don't have to be. He comes out of that sun as like sort of like he is transferred to the next step. Like he's not Superman anymore. He's like this sort of like otherworldly being. Yeah, he looks like Superman, but he doesn't act like Superman. He's like the Superman that is Clark Kent that goes into that sun is gone.
Yeah.
He has transformed. He has evolved. Now, I call that death. It doesn't have to be death, but to me, it's a similar. It's
like transcending this mortal life.
Bingo,
quote unquote.
So even if he is in that sun, like fixing it and making it work,
he's not like the Superman that we think of.
When he comes back out of it, it is like similar. If you watch Star Trek: Deep Space Nine,
yeah.
When Ben Sisko, spoilers for a 30-year-old series, when Ben Sisko goes into the wormhole at the end of that series, if he were to ever come back, he would not be Ben Sisko
Do you
anymore.
look at that as his death?
Yes. It is 100% his death.
That's so funny. I'm just like, no, he comes back and goes to Bajor.
The person who wrote that episode said he dies.
Yeah, well, you would know.
He dies. I've read that interview. He was like, I'm going to do the one thing. Ira Stephen Bear wrote an interview. He said, when he was writing the finale of Deep Space Nine, he said,
Another genius.
He's another genius like Grant Morrison. Same level as Grant Morrison.
Dan Jurgens, 100%.
And just like Dan, we're talking about a lot of very talented people in this episode. And I love it. Just do a GSL on talented people.
Read
Iris, the reason why he did that ending is he said that he was like, I'm going to do the one thing that no other Star Trek series has done. I'm going to kill the captain.
That's so funny because again, I don't look at maybe that's me or maybe that's like a feminine view of the world versus a masculine, but I don't. Like, I agree. It's like, it's a trip. I don't view it as death because to me, like, he always comes back and goes to Bajor.
Yes. And I know, like, just like Superman in that series, there's a version of him that talks to his wife.
Yeah.
But if you listen to the way he acts, it's not him. Or he has been transformed.
I can't deal with the idea that he would leave Jake.
Yeah. He didn't leave him by choice.
I know.
Deep
Space Nine Talk.
Deep Space Nine Talk. But it's very similar. All of these myths have an idea that, like, if that person comes back, they're not going to be the same person.
It's so
It's very similar to
in its way. Or
it's just like
Muhammad, right? Like Muhammad never died. Like Muhammad, he just ascends.
It's like Jesus. It's that same myth.
Yeah, I mean, it's the Osiris myth in Egyptian mythology. Yeah, it's very ancient.
To bring it back to our same conversation, it's so funny because I don't hear a lot of people think about that way. But like, I have always seen the All-Star Superman storyline as like, oh, this is Death of Superman, but like done in sort of like an artsy way.
I mean, 100% it is. It's like, what if Death of Superman and the 12 Laborers of Hercules had a baby?
One
of my favorite issues though is when Lois gets her superpowers.
It's great. Issue 2.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's issue 3, I think. But yeah, it's so funny because so that's how I would do. Like, to me, I'm like, I can't even think of a better version because I'm like, All-Star Superman did Death of Superman a million times better than I could.
They also made a great movie of it.
They did.
Yeah.
Written by their late great Jawiin McDuffie.
Another genius.
Hey, have you heard the news? Superman died today.
Yeah.
So there you go. Death of Superman.
There you go.
Yeah. Does that mean that this is the death of this episode?
I mean, yeah, I think it's about that time.
Oh, man. Well.
It's only a little death.
Or a million little deaths?
Sure.
Google that, kids. Anyways,
learn your French.
There you go. Thank you so much. I want to thank you all for coming. Everybody that has brought potlucks and casseroles. Thank you. We're going to put them in the fridge.
I do love a casserole.
But I think we just need to give the podcast its time. Thank you so much for coming to Geek History Lesson this week. I am Jason, not a Reverend Inman.
I was wondering if you're going to do that. I'm Ashley Victoria Robinson and not Reverend Jason.
Yes.
Would you please dismiss the class?
Thank you all for coming. There are programs at the front, and take care of yourselves.